The sky over Texas burned the color of old blood the evening I heard the gunshots. I'd been riding the southern ridge, pushing a half-wild mare back toward the herd, when the echoes rolled across the canyon like thunder with steel in it. One shot, then another, then silence so deep I could hear my own breath rasping in my chest. 10 years. 10 long, hollow years since I'd buried Lydia in the frozen earth behind the cabin. In all that time, not a single soul had dared set foot inside that lonely house. I'd left it the way she'd touched it last, her shawl over the chair, her Bible on the table, her scent fading to memory and dust. No one lit a lamp there, no one had reason to. But that night, when I crested the ridge, I saw Iton orange flicker through the warped panes of glass. A lantern glowing steady in the window. My mouth went dry. My hands tightened on the reins till the mare danced sideways. A man who's lived with ghosts as long as I have doesn't mistake their calling cards. I slid off the saddle slow, my knees aching like an old man's, though I wasn't past 40. My colt weighed heavy against my hip, the way an oath weighs. Heavy on a man's heart? The boards of the porch groaned when I stepped up. That sound hit me harder than any gunshot. I'd mended those planks myself once, cursing the sun. Lydia laughing beside me with her skirts tied back and her hands already blistered. The door was closed but not locked. That was wrong. I'd locked it myself the day I walked away, swearing never to go back. I pushed it open, and I saw her. A woman. My chair. Her chair sitting with her head bowed over something in her hands. The lamplight fell across hair the color of ripe wheat and skin that hadn't seen enough sun. My throat closed, my chest clenched. Lydia. The name tore out of me, ragged as a prayer I'd forgotten how to say. The woman lifted her head. Brown eyes so familiar, I swayed where I stood, but the face. Younger, sharper, restless in a way Lydia never was. She stood. The chair scraped across the floorboards. She didn't flinch at the pistol in my hand, didn't step back like most strangers would when they met me in the half-dark. "I'm not Lydia," she said, her voice steady low, carrying something I couldn't name. "My name is Marianne. I'm her sister." Her sister. The word hit me harder than the first gunshot. I had known Lydia's family only by the letters she wrote, the words she read aloud to me by lamplight when the prairie nights got too quiet. A father who wanted her back in New Orleans, a mother who sent trinkets and silks Lydia never wore, and a sister Marianne. A girl too young then to understand why Lydia had walked away from a ballroom. Life to follow a dirt-poor rancher into the wilderness. "You shouldn't be here," I muttered. My voice came out rough, like gravel in a dry riverbed. "Maybe not." She laid the book on the table, and I saw what it was: Lydia's diary. The worn leather cover still faint with the oil of her hands. Marianne's gaze never wavered. I came because of her letters, because no one else would tell me the truth. I holstered the Colt but didn't move closer. My heart hammered like it was trying to break free. The truth is simple. She died here. That's all there is to it. No, Marianne's chin lifted. That's not all. Lydia wrote me of sunsets that turned the sky to gold, mornings by the fire when you'd sit silent, but she swore she could hear the weight of your heart in the quiet. She wrote of a man she loved so deeply it terrified her. And then her voice faltered. Her last letter was different, like she knew the end was coming. And then nothing. 10 years of nothing. The storm of January 77 rose up inside me, sharp. As a brand pressed against skin, the wind howling like a beast, the snow piled to the roof, Lydia coughing until her voice turned to whispers, my useless hands pressing cool cloths against her fevered skin, digging her grave with numb fingers when the earth was stone. She was afraid, Marianne pressed, eyes narrowing. Of what? Of dying, I snapped, more harshly than I meant. That's what she was afraid of, and she did. In this room, in that bed, with me sitting helpless beside her, the silence that followed felt heavier than lead. Marianne studied me like she could scrape away the layers of dust and grief if she stared long enough. "You left it all," she said softly. Her eyes moved over the room, the faded curtains, the shawl on the chair, the Bible on the table, like a shrine. "It's not a shrine. My throat burned. It's a grave. The wind rattled the shutters, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then, from outside, came the crunch of hooves and the murmur of low voices. I froze. Marianne's head snapped toward the window. "What is it?" She whispered. "Trouble," I said. It's already reaching for the Winchester above the hearth. Through the narrow crack in the shutters, I saw them 3 riders dismounting near the corral. Their silhouettes moved sharp and quick, not lost travelers, not neighbors. Wolves circling. My herd was out there, scattered. The house had always been a mark for scavengers who thought a lonely man might be an easy target. But I wasn't alone tonight, and they'd chosen the wrong cabin. "Stay down," I told Marianne. She bristled. "I'm not afraid to do what I say." My tone left no room for argument. I eased the shutter wider, sighting down the rifle. One of the men crept toward the barn, another toward the well. The third lingered by the fence, scanning the house. He carried himself like the leader. The cold steadied me. My blood quieted the way it always did before a fight. 10 years of grief hadn't dulled the instincts that had kept me alive on this land. The man by the fence raised his hand. The others began to move. I chambered around, the metallic click sharp in the stillness. Our heads snapped toward the sound. For a breath, time froze. Then the night exploded. The first shot cracked through the window pane. Glass shattering around me. I fired back, saw the leader dive for cover. Hooves screamed as the horses spooked, tearing at their reins. Marianne gasped. Crouched low against the wall, I caught a glimpse of her pale face, eyes wide, but her jaw was set tight. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to break. "Hand me something," she said suddenly. Her voice shook but held. I shoved the Colt across the floor toward her. Her hands closed around it. Uncertain, but determined. The door banged, as one of the men tried to force it open. I swung the rifle and fired point blank through the wood. The blast rocked the cabin, smoke filling my lungs. A cry cut short outside. The others cursed, their boots pounding across the dirt. Another shot whined past my head, splintering the frame. I dropped low, heart hammering, then dashed the sharp crack of the Colt. Marianne had fired. Through the smoke, I saw one of the shadows stumble back, clutching his arm, swearing loud enough to wake the dead. He bolted for the corral, blood dark against his sleeve. The leader yelled, voice ragged with fury, "We'll be back, McGraw. Can't hide behind your ghosts forever." And then they were gone, galloping into the dark, leaving nothing but churned dirt and the bitter tang of gunpowder. The silence afterward felt louder than the gunfire. My hands shook as I lowered the Winchester. The room stank of smoke and fear. Marianne still crouched by the wall. The Colt loose in her grip, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Her hair had come undone, strands clinging to her face. She looked both terrified and defiant, like a doe that had turned to fight the wolves instead of running. I crossed to her, took the gun gently from her hands. "You did good," I said gruffly. Her laugh was half a sob. I nearly missed. "You didn't." Our eyes met then, close enough for me to see the gold flecks in her brown irises. Close enough for me to feel the line I'd sworn never to cross bending beneath the weight of something I couldn't name. The night settled again, but not the way it had been, for it was the familiar emptiness I'd grown used to, a silence I could wrap around myself like a threadbare blanket. Now it was alive with echoes, shouts, gunfire, the sharp scent of powder that clung to my skin, and her. Always her. Marianne sat back against the wall, wiping her face with the heel of her hand. She wasn't crying anymore. She was studying me, gaze unflinching, as if she'd seen the measure of me in the way I pulled that trigger and wanted to know more. "You've made enemies," she said at last. I barked a bitter laugh. "Lady, out here a man makes enemies. Just by drawing breath." Her brow arched a gesture too much like Lydia's. It punched the wind from me. "Who were they?" she pressed. I shook my head. "Scavengers. Hired hands." "Could have been sent by Hensley?" "Hensley? Victor Hensley? Owns half the county and wants the other half. He's had his eye on my land since before Lydia." My voice trailed. I couldn't push her name through my teeth without feeling. It cut me on the way out. Marianne leaned forward, eyes burning. Then he's the reason she sounded afraid in that last letter. Don't, I snapped. Harder than I meant. Don't turn her death into someone's scheme. She died of sickness, of winter. Nothing more. But even as I said it, doubt crept in like frost through cracks in the window. Lydia had never confessed fear to me. She'd smiled until she couldn't anymore. Had she told Marianne something I hadn't seen? I busied myself with the rifle, cleaning it in silence. Marianne rose, walked to the window, and pulled the shutter closed with a quiet thud. She moved like she belonged here. Like she hadn't just walked into a house sealed up by grief for a decade. You should rest, I muttered. She turned, the lamplight catching her hair. So should you. There was something in her tone gentle, but firm, the way Lydia used to scold me when I pushed too hard. For one insane second, I wanted to close the space between us, to bury my face in that golden hair and pretend time hadn't stolen everything from me. But Marianne wasn't. Lydia, and the ghost between us was too heavy. I shoved the thought aside, dropped the rifle onto the table. We'll talk in the morning. Sleep didn't come. I lay on the narrow cot in the corner, boots still on, staring at the ceiling beams I'd hewn myself back when the world felt wide open. Marianne lay across the room in Lydia's old bed, though I doubted she slept either. I could hear her shifting, the faint sigh as she turned over. Every sound dragged me back through memory. Lydia's laughter, light as wind chimes, her cough, tearing like glass through her chest, her stillness at the end. I pressed an arm across my eyes, fighting it back. Marianne's presence had torn open the walls I'd built brick by brick. And once a wall breaks, the storm rushes in. Dawn came gray and sharp. I found myself outside before the sun, inspecting the corral. The intruders had left churned earth. Broken rails, their tracks led west, toward Hensley's spread. My jaw tightened. If the bastard wanted to test me, he'd picked the wrong week. Behind me, the door creaked. Marianne stepped out, wrapped in Lydia's old shawl, the wool frayed at the edges. My chest squeezed at the sight. You planning to go after them? She asked. No? The word was harder than iron. That's what they'd expect. Let them wonder instead. She came closer, studying the tracks. You can't fight a man like Hensley alone. I turned on her, temper rising. This isn't your fight. Her chin lifted, stubborn as a mule. It became my fight the moment they tried to kill me. I stared at her, fire clashing with fire. Part of me wanted to push her back on that eastbound train before she got burned. Another part darker. Selfish didn't want to let her out of my sight by midday. I'd saddled the mare and ridden into town. I needed supplies, and word needed spreading. Jonas McGraw wasn't lying down for anyone. Marianne insisted on coming. I argued, cursed, but she wouldn't budge. In the end, I let her ride alongside, her posture awkward in the saddle, but her resolve hard as granite. Silver Creek hadn't changed in 10 years. Same dusty Main Street, same clapboard buildings leaning into the wind, but the eyes that followed me now were different, curious, respectful even. Folks had heard the gunfire. They knew something had gone down. At Carter's Forge, the blacksmith wiped sweat from his brow and nodded. Heard you had visitors? I grunted. They left with fewer than they came. His gaze slid to Marianne, then back to me. Word. Is Hensley stirring up more trouble than usual? Word's right, I said. Marianne leaned forward in her saddle, voice clear enough for half the street to hear. Then we should be ready. I shot her a sharp look, but the damage was done. Murmurs rippled through the bystanders. A woman at my side, speaking like she had a stake in my fight, wasn't the story they'd expected. Some looked impressed. Others looked scandalized. Rosie, the widow who ran the boarding house, came bustling out with her apron flapping. Jonas McGraw, you fool man, you bring trouble wherever you go. Now you've brought it here, with a lady no less. She's not, I started, but Marianne cut me off. I'm exactly where I need to be. Rosie blinked, taken aback, then gave a short nod. Well then, God help you both. We stayed in town longer than I liked, gathering flour, beans, lamp oil. Everywhere we went, whispers followed.
Yes.
Marianne carried herself straight. eyes forward, as if daring anyone to question her right to walk at my side. But beneath her resolve, I could see the shadows. The way her hands trembled when she thought no one noticed. The haunted look when she glanced at the telegraph office, where trains east could carry her back to the safety of society. That night, back at the cabin, I found her sitting by the fire with Lydia's diary again. She closed it when I entered, but not before I saw the page she'd been reading. Lydia's handwriting, curling and elegant, the last lines dark with ink. Sometimes I think the storm outside isn't the one I should fear. It's the storm inside. Jonas, he carries more silence than a man should. If it breaks, I wonder if it will destroy him more, save him. My knees buckled. I sat hard on the edge of the table, staring into the fire. Lydia had known. She'd seen the cracks in me long before I'd admitted them. Marianne's voice was quiet. She wanted you to live. Not just survive. Live. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 10 years, tears threatened. My chest ached with the weight of it all, the years wasted, the walls built, the fear of betraying a memory by daring to love again. When I opened them, Marianne was watching me, not with pity, with something fiercer, and I knew deep down that my life had just been split in two, the years before she came, whatever years might come after. That night, the wind carried the howl of coyotes across the plains. But inside the cabin, the fire burned steady. Marianne slept in Lydia's bed, and I lay awake on the cot, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Every rise and fall was a reminder of what I'd lost, of what I might find, of how dangerous hope could be, because hope, I was learning, could kill a man just as sure as any bullet. The night wind moved through the brittle grass, whispering like the voices of the dead. I stood by the charred fence from the last ambush, eyes fixed on the horizon as dusk bled away. The Texas sky at sundown looked like a wound that refused. Too close raw red, bruised purple swallowed piece by the dark. Marianne brought out the lantern. The golden flame trembling across half her face. Her brown eyes held mine, silent, yet I could read in them what I did not want to admit. The next storm was already on its way. You can't stay silent forever, Jonas. Her voice was low, steady as steel. If Hensley sent men once, he'll send them again. Next time, it won't be just to frighten us. He'll come to take everything. She was right, and I knew it. But part of me still wanted to deny it, to believe that if we kept quiet, clung to one another, the outside world would forget this lonely ranch even existed. You lived 10 years without a soul coming near, she pressed, laying her hand on the fence post. 10 years alone. But then I came, then his men came. This isn't a tomb for the past anymore. This is the place where you have to stand. I turned away, fists clenching. To stand meant to face blood, bullets, loss all over again. I had buried one woman behind this house. Could I bear to bury another? The next morning, Silver Creek boiled like a stew pot on the fire. Word had spread through the saloon, the smithy, even the dry goods store. Hensley was gathering a gang. I walked into Carter's forge with Marianne at my side to pick up fresh rounds. The room went silent as we entered, then buzzed like a hive split open. That her? Lydia's sister, an old woman whispered. What business has an outsider with this land? Another muttered. I was used to the stares, but Marianne met them head on, her back straight as an oak, as though their whispers couldn't pierce. Her skin? Bill Carter wiped his hands on his leather apron, gave me a short nod. Hensley's paying double wages to every drifter he can find. A man don't throw coin like that unless he's fixing for a fight. I only nodded, reaching for the ammunition box. Marianne's voice cut the air sharp, and the town. What? Will Silver Creek do sit quiet while Hensley steals Jonas's land out from under him? The smithy fell into silence again. They looked at Marianne, then at me. I saw it in their eyes. Half admiration for her courage, half resentment that a woman dared to speak where men usually ruled. Bill Carter sniffed. Girl, out here folks, pick their side. And most times the side with power is the side worth staying. Alive on. Color rose in Marianne's cheeks, and she opened her mouth to fire back. I laid a hand on her shoulder, holding her still. This wasn't the time to argue. It's not with men who hadn't yet chosen which way the wind would blow. That night, as we rode back to the ranch, the wind carried the faint scent of smoke. Not hearth smoke. Wildfire. Marianne drew a sharp breath. He's burning out the other homesteads. I said nothing. The fire was miles off, but it might as well have been a message written in flames. Wait, McGrath. The next blaze will be yours. We began to prepare, braced the fences, drove new posts, stacked sandbags along the porch. Marianne insisted on mastering the revolver, and I couldn't refuse her. I taught her to sight the barrel, steady her breathing, squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. Every night the crack of gunfire echoed across the yard, tangled with the long, mournful howl of the wind. Like fate itself was calling out. When we rested, she sat beside me on the porch steps, sweat streaking her brow, dust smudged across her, skin but fire alive in her eyes. I'm not afraid, Jonas. I turned to her. You should be. The dead don't fear. The living know what it means to lose. She gave a small, sad smile, but her voice never wavered. I already lost my eye. Sister, lost the family who trusted me. I didn't come here to run. If fire comes for us, I'll stand with you. Her words cut straight to the bone. I wanted to push her away, put her on a horse, drive her far from this cursed patch of earth. But in her eyes I saw it plain. If I forced her to leave, I'd kill the very life she'd fought to claim. On the third day, the scouts came. 2 riders crested the ridge, circling slow, mean grins on their faces. One spat in the dirt, raised a finger in promise. Then they turned. South, toward Hensley's spread. Marianne stood beside me, hand tight on the grip of her revolver. They're coming, yeah. I let out a breath that felt like a mountain grinding down on my chest. And this time, they won't ride away empty-handed. The night settled thick, horses restless in the corral, the air laced with the scent of distant fire. And I knew, as sure as sunrise, that when morning came, the fate of this land of me, of Marianne, would be written in blood. I didn't sleep, neither did the land. Toward midnight, the wind swung east, and the scent of smoke came stronger, like a match struck under God's own nose. The horses tossed in the corral, hooves clattering, restless as my thoughts. I'd sandbagged the porch and roped a second line of fence between the cottonwoods. It would slow men down, not stop them. Men with money behind them don't stop easy. Marianne moved beside me like a shadow, the lantern's wick turned low. She wore Lydia's patched trail coat over a calico dress that had seen better days. I told her a dozen times to take the bed. She told me a dozen times to save my breath for the fight. When the first coyote fell silent, I knew they were close. A far-off thud, then another hooves. Many. The sound rolled over the grass like a drumbeat for the dead. Lanterns out, I murmured. She pinched the flame. Darkness folded over us, thick and complete. In the black, I could feel her shift to the left of the porch post, where I'd shown her the kill hole between the sandbags, the angle that watched. The gate. I thumbed the Winchester and slid 2 extra shells between my fingers. A habit I'd carried since before the winter took Lydia. The riders broke from the ridge in a ragged arc. Lanterns swinging from their saddles, making their faces jump and blur wolves with fire in their teeth. I counted 12, then 3 more snaking behind, driving a mule cart piled with something swaddled in burlap. Kerosene, if Hensley had any sense. He had too much. They pulled up just beyond the first fence, the leader raising a gloved hand. Lantern light cut across his face. Clean-shaven, fine hat, a silver-tipped bolo catching the gold. Not Hensley. Hensley never dirtied his boots at the edge of other men's land. This was a hired spine, too composed for a drifter, too slick. For a cowhand McGrath, called, voice bright as a bell and twice as false. Evening to you? My lips barely moved. Evening. No need for hard feelings. Mr. Hensley is ready to ease your burden. There's weather coming. Times are lean, and this place is more trouble than it's worth to a widower with complications. His gaze flicked toward the porch shadow, where Marianne waited. A few snickers rippled through the men behind him. I laid the rifle's front sight on the knot of his tie and kept my voice calm. This ground holds a grave, makes it mine. A pause, as if he weighed words like coins. Graves can be moved. Not this one, he sighed. The kind of theatrical sorrow a man uses when he's already chosen violence. He lifted his hand. Two of his riders swung off and started forward. With the burlap bundles? Kerosene, Marianne whispered. We can't let them reach the porch. Not the porch, I said. The grass, I fired. The leader had time to blink surprise as a hard thing to hide before his hat lifted and he dropped boneless to the dirt. The riders flinched, then the night tore open. Muzzle flashes strobed along the fence. Bullets punched the sandbags and tore splinters from the post near my cheek. I hit the second man at the mule cart, shoulder shot, sent him spinning into a wheel. Marianne's revolver cracked once, twice measured and steady. A third rider screamed and fell across the lower rail. They fell back quick the way trained men do, dragging the wounded. Cussing in a harsh country I'd heard in mining camps and railroad towns. The mule bawled and kicked, the cart tipped. A burlap bundle rolled, tore, and the stink of kerosene. Slash the air gate, I called. They regrouped at the gate, a knot of shadows. One of them, a tall, row-bone shape with a lantern, started for the latch. Marianne took him through the lantern. It burst like a yellow flower and doused. Him in flame, he stumbled, shrieking. Two men tackled him and rolled him in the dust. That'll make them careful, I said. That's the point, she said back, clipped and breathless. They shifted tactics after that. To peeled wide into the cottonwoods where fence shadowed fence, trying to flank. Another pair crawled low through the grass, dark smears inching toward the porch. The mule cart creaked back, the last burlap sacks guarded by three not eager to share their friend's fate. Something about the way the crawling pair moved tickled a memory, methodical, counting their breaths. The way soldiers crawl when someone has taught them to respect open ground. This wasn't a gang of pure drifters. Hensley had gone shopping for men who'd learned to kill properly. The thought should have twisted cold around my heart. Instead, it settled me. You can read men like that the way you read weather, predict the gusts. I slid from the porch to the left, low and quick, and ghosted behind the rain barrel to the line. Of spare rails I'd stacked earlier, 20 yards out, I'd left a shovel standing and a coil of wire looped over it, habit from years of mending fence in the dark. I dragged the wire with me and strung it knee-high between two posts on the bare stretch where the crawlers would get brave. They did. The first hit the wire and yelped, pitching forward. I shot the ground beside his face close enough to fling dirt into his eyes. He clawed backward, gagging. His partner fired blind. The ball shaved bark from the post near my shoulder. Marianne's revolver answered, clean knocking his pistol out of his hand. He rolled and crawled toward his friends, cussing me for every kind of thief. Gate again, she called. I glanced right. The gate latch lifted. A head edged through, hair ropey with sweat. I fired, the latch dropped, and the head vanished. Someone to the far right hollered, "Light it!" Spark danced behind the mule cart. The last burlap bundle glowed oily as they doused it. If they got a burning sack to the porch, we'd have nothing left but smoking ribs. "Marianne," I said, "the cart. I see it." She fired once and missed high. She took a breath the way I'd taught her, squeezed instead of jerked. The lantern on the cart shattered, blackness fell, and with it a confusion that sounded like hope. I ran low across the yard and put a round into the mule's yoke pin. The beast leaped, the cart lurched, and the last of the sacks slid off and burst in a silver lake that soaked the dust. Kerosene glittered in starlight. All it needed was a match to turn my life to a pyre. The leader's second short, barrel-chested, voice like gravel took command. "Hold fire, close and finish it." They surged for the gate. I had three advantages: the fence line, the choke of the gate, the simple stubbornness that had kept me breathing through 10 winters that didn't care if I did. They had numbers and coin. Coin can't teach you to love a piece of ground the way a grave can. The first man through caught a barrel to the chest. He folded. The second tripped over him and sprawled. The third got both boots over the lower rail and met the iron sight of Marianne's Colt. He froze with the kind of stillness a man finds at the edge of a cliff. She held him there, trigger half-pressed, eyes dark and unblinking. "Don't," she said. He did the math, dropped back, and scuttled away on hands and knees. "That's 3 breaths somebody else gets to take," I said. "I'll settle for that," she answered. A rifle cracked from the cottonwoods flat, clean too far for the men under the porch line. The bullet took a chip out of the porch, post inches from Marianne's ear. She didn't flinch. I rolled and sighted on the flash. The next shot came from further left. A good shooter, walking his aim, probing. "Sniper," I said. Back inside low, we slid behind the sandbags and listened. The yard went quiet the way it does when a predator steps into a clearing. Everything else waits to see what gets taken. The next shot didn't go for me. It went for the kerosene lake. The spark hit the edge, sputtered, then swelled yellow. The silver turned to a sheet of fire that raced across the dirt. Heat rolled over the porch like a living thing. Back, grabbed Marianne, and we tumbled through the door, smoke chasing us. The yard brightened today. The horse in the corral screamed mad with terror. The men beyond the fence whooped like devils tasting Sunday supper. Kitchen pump. Marianne coughed, pulling at the hand pump I'd set in the washstand. The cistern groaned and gave a stingy trickle into the bucket. I hauled it to the porch and flung water at the fire. It hissed and laughed and ate more ground. If the rails caught, the fence would be a torch line right to the house barn, I said. If the hay goes, she didn't argue. She flew for the back door, braids snapping behind her. A chest tightened. The sniper was still out there, and he'd shifted twice. A woman running through lamplight is a kind of target that makes certain men religious. I took 2 quick shots. At the cottonwoods left and right of the last flash, to make him duck. Then I sprinted for the side yard and heaved the soaked canvas I'd stored for rain, patching over the nearest flaming rail. The canvas sizzled and spat. Smoke seared my throat. Behind me, the pump clanked. Marianne dragged a second bucket through the back door and doused the base of the porch post. From the trees, the sniper found me again. The bullet cut my sleeve, and the air took the burn and stuffed it down my arm. "Close range now," barrel chest roared. "Take the door." They came hard. Men vaulted the gate, one after the other, using the fire-bright yard to blind us. 2 dived for the porch, 1 hit the sandbags and rolled. The 4th went wide toward the window. I met the first in the doorway. He brought up his revolver. I slammed the rifle stock into his wrist and felt bones give. He screamed. I shoulder drove him into the jam. Sagged but clawed at my coat. The second came over his back, knife out, a dirty hooked thing meant for pig throats. I let the rifle fall, caught his wrist, and twisted. The knife clattered. He swore in a language I didn't know and grabbed my hair. I took his head. When I opened my eyes, the world was blurred, as though veiled by smoke. The first light that reached me was the faint yellow of a lantern flame. No more gunfire, no more powder stench.
Ow.
Only the smell of dried mushrooms simmering in a pot of broth and the ragged pull of my own breath. Marianne sat beside me, eyes shadowed, hair loose and tangled as if she had wrestled the whole world. Her hands still pressed the cloth bandage against my shoulder, soaked through with blood and sweat. "Jonas." Her voice was hoarse, trembling but fierce. "You're alive," I tried to answer, but only a rasp came out. She bent low, her ear close to my mouth. I heard my own whisper. "You didn't leave." She laughed through her tears. "You thought I'd abandon you?" The days that followed crawled like sand in a broken hourglass. Fever gripped me, dragging me down into half-real, half-dream visions. In those dreams, Lydia came. She stood on a snowbound field, her eyes bright, her smile tender. "It's time, Jonas," she murmured. "You've held me in your heart long. Enough. Now let go." I reached for her, but she drifted back, light as wind. And behind her, Marianne's shape appeared not as a ghost, but as a real flame, warm and unyielding. When I woke again, Marianne was changing my bandages. Dawn streamed through the window, painting her face in a glow that was both weary and radiant. In her eyes, I no longer saw haunting shadows, only the promise that I wasn't alone anymore. "You look at me like you've come back from the dead," she whispered. "Because I have," I rasped. "You pulled me back." Word spread. Across Silver Creek, Jonas McGraw hadn't fallen, and the town had stood against Hensley. Those who once turned away now came by, some bringing lumber, some provisions, some only a few plain words, but honest ones. "You held this ground for all of us," Bill Carter said, his iron hand heavy on my shoulder. "Now you're not alone. Any more?" Rosie brought a basket of warm bread, trying to hide her red eyes. Eli, the boy who once knew only how to curry horses, now stood tall as a man. Looking up at me as if searching for a mirror of his own future, Marianne watched it all, and I knew she understood. This wasn't just one man's land anymore. It was where a whole community chose to put down roots. One evening, when the wound had begun to knit, I hobbled with a cane out to the new fence. The Texas sun fell like a chalice of red wine across the fields. Marianne walked beside me, her golden hair catching fire in the glow. I stopped, heart pounding, and took her hand. Small, calloused now from the weeks of shooting practice, but warm and steady. "Stay," I said, voice thick but certain. "Stay with me. Not as Lydia's shadow, not as a guest passing through. Stay as yourself." Her eyes shone. She nodded slowly, as if she had waited for those words all along. "I'll stay, Jonas. And this time, we'll live. Truly live," he began again from the ashes. The town helped raise new barns, rebuild the herd. Marianne planted seeds in a small garden, singing softly each morning, her voice mingling with the wind like a prayer for the harvest. I no longer merely existed. I worked, I laughed, and sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I held Marianne by the hearth, listened to her heartbeat, and knew I still had a future. One sunset. As we rode out across the fields together, I looked back at the rebuilt house. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and steady as incense. Farther out, the wooden cross over Lydia's grave still stood firm, its shadow stretching long. I reached for Marianne's hand, and she turned to me, smiling in the fading light. In that smile, I saw no ghosts, only a road ahead, long, uncertain, but rich with hope. We urged the horses forward, our figures blending into the Texas horizon, tall, proud, alive, no longer a man alone in the desert, no longer chained to the past. I had learned to make loss the soil from which something new could grow, a love fiercer and stronger than before, and for the first time in 10 years, I was no longer afraid of tomorrow.